Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the podcast where I, Gooey, rank every dungeon in The Legend of Zelda, and it is time to go rescue Zelda. That's right, we're headed to Turtle Rock. Turtle Rock, it's got another Dark World portal puzzle required to enter it. If you make it to this dungeon up in the Dark World, up in Dark Death Mountain, and you're looking at it, it is this giant turtle-looking structure, and the top of it is marked with another magic medallion logo, much like Misery Mire. Now, in the light world, in the exact same location as the structure, there's this little puzzle with some spikes that you have to hammer down in the right order to create a portal that'll put you on top of it, where you can use the Quake medallion to reveal the entrance. So again, it's another neat little puzzle that they've been kind of changing it up with, like entering the Dark World to find the entrance. I like this one just as well, and it's a cool scene, using the medallion to reveal the entrance. So already, off to kind of a epic beginning, much like Misery Mire. The dungeon itself has such a wild vibe, in my opinion. It's very strange. I love it though. It's all these weird elements mixed together. There's stuff from Mario in it, with there's chain chomps and pipes that you warp around in or move around in. That kind of makes me think of the Mario pipes. But then there's more of those laser eyes from Misery Mire all over that assault you when you walk by them. And the walls and the floor and the layout of it actually look like how the inside of caves do in this game. So it does give it this kind of extra familiarity, or it feels cavernous. Some people probably would think of it as a fire dungeon because there's rooms where you're over fiery pits, but it's not even just that, you know what I mean? It's wild. Probably the most obvious standout element that people would know is a new use for the Cane of Samaria, which is it can make platforms that you can step on and ride around in certain rooms. And it's a kind of a neat feature, and it does create some cool moments in the dungeon itself. But the entrance to the dungeon and right before the boss chamber, they have this sort of linear section you can ride a platform on that just kind of hypes you up for the entrance and the boss chamber entrance. There's also a pretty nifty torch puzzle in this that uses that mechanic that I like. But there is one kind of standout room that uses this feature, and it personally drives me nuts. It's a room where the platform, it can kind of be difficult to control to get it to go the way you want, but in particular, it's the room itself makes it a little bit difficult because it's dark, and so it's hard to get a grip on which way the various pathways go. The room wouldn't be as hard, obviously, if you could just see where the next turns were coming. But it's pitch black in there. And then there's these, swirling flame bars that hit you, and sometimes there's not really much you can do to avoid them. So it can be very aggravating. This room actually really ticks me off because I feel I'm just draining health and magic trying to navigate it, and in not a very satisfying way. Navigationally though, the dungeon I'm talking about, it's actually not as hard as it makes itself seem to be, which is kind of surprising given that it's you're going to save Zelda or whatever. But yeah, the dungeon itself, it's actually somewhat linear for the most part, though it has some kind of flourishes added to it that make it seem a little bit more confusing. For example, the first floor you go to is pretty much self-contained with what you need to do to progress. But there's an optional room for the compass. This is kind of classic stuff in this game at this point, but there's a troll room, of course. You can get through that, and then you get to the second floor, and it's also pretty linear, but now you have those warp or twisty pipes that you move around in, and it makes it seem it's kind of hard to at first be if I go in this end of the pipe, I'll come out on this side of the room, because they twist around the room. It seems confusing, but there's really actually only a few connections. There's only really one true path, I think, to progress, with some distractions or whatever. For example, like another way it adds this complexity is by having multiple doors that actually lead out of the dungeon. Obviously, it's something we've seen before, but here it's very unique in this one. It puts you on like various cliff sides on Dark Death Mountain. There's like some that allow you to come back to other parts of the dungeon, and then there's like another that it leads to what seems like a dead end. But of course, if you use the mirror in the light, it'll transport you to the light world, and it actually will lead you to a way to find an extra heart piece. So it's kind of a cool little bonus puzzle, and it really changes it up, I think. The one path that leads you out of the dungeon and back in actually gives you what is pretty much an optional item in this dungeon, which is the mirror shield. The last time I played it, I actually accidentally passed it over, but it makes blocking stuff like those laser eyes that shoot you way less of a hassle. Though, of course, in A Link to the Past fashion, there's a lot of ways you can overcome that obstacle, which I think is really cool. You know, when you first enter the dungeon, a telepathic tile gives you this warning that you probably want magic restoring medicine, of course, again, it's a great tip, obviously, because you need plenty of magic for the Cane of Samaria, but also we just get into talking about the boss Trinix actually requires quite a bit of magic, I would say. Trinix is what is like becomes a classic boss conceit in Zelda. It's, well, for one, he's a giant dinosaur with 3 heads, but the thing that's unique about him is one is like a red head that shoots fire out at you, and another one is a blue one that shoots ice. It's pretty clear what you got to do. You have the ice and the fire rods, so you know you can hit him with those, and sometimes you can stun him with those and hit him with the sword, which, you know, you use less magic there, but this becomes kind of a staple in many future Zelda games. I also think it's cool to see like the ice rod come into play like this, because it's sort of not an optional, but because you obviously need it here, but it's like an item that is multiple people hint you at it like right away in the beginning of the game, and you can go get it right away. And there's plenty of uses for it throughout the game, but nothing like explicit. And then now it's like finally comes into play here in like what is the penultimate dungeon, and I just think that's really cool. So, you know, we defeat Trinix and we free Zelda, you know, the last maiden that we need to free. And of course we kind of give this hype that, you know, now that all the maidens have been freed, they're going to use their help you use their magic to go break whatever seal that there is on Ganon's tower. And of course it's just, you know, a classic setup here, of course, to the final dungeon. That's going to be coming on our next week's episode, but of course we have to rank this dungeon. Obviously, I really like this dungeon, to be honest. I like the layout and everything like that. I like the weird tone and stuff. I like leaving the dungeon, especially with how the dungeon's meant to kind of feel like cavernous, like part of the cave, part of the mountain, you know, and the walls and everything and the way it looks. And then when you warp to the light world, or like just go in and out of it, you're like within the mountain. And if you've done some like exploration in the mountain, some of those caves like even tie into that. So it does feel like part of the world in a cool way. So that's a big plus for me. I do think like some of the platform stuff, like in that one room, for example, it kind of really takes me out of it. But overall, I still think this is a really solid dungeon. But it's not one of my favorites. Like I said, I think the layout is decent. It doesn't really crack the top 5 for me, I don't think. Like those top 5 right now are kind of like, I think like the top of the heap. Like I love these dungeons. And then just below are like great dungeons that I really like, but for me, they don't resonate as much. I'm going to put it just outside of the top 5 at number 6, right before Hyrule Castle. I think it's great. I think it's a good kind of second to last dungeon. It's difficult, but not too difficult. And it's a good change of pace from the last dungeon. But, you know, it has its flaws. But overall, I don't have a lot of bad things to say about it, you know. It just, it doesn't stack up to some of my favorites. But there we go. It's a solid dungeon. Here we are, leading into our season finale of A Link to the Past. I think once again, we're probably going to do something special for it. So you're definitely going to want to tune in next week. Bye, everyone.